Ladies and gentlemen, trace rifles remain in a pretty strange spot here in Season of the Chosen, and with the recently announced sandbox tuning coming for Season 14, it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon. But do trace rifles still have a place in the game? More specifically, does Wavesplitter still have a place in the game? This was a weapon that I really liked using back when it launched in Forsaken. At that point, it was a PlayStation 4 exclusive, and I'm glad those days are behind us. But back when I was playing on PlayStation, this weapon was a hot pick in the Crucible. It was good, it was strong, but so much has changed in Destiny 2 since that point. What can Wavesplitter do for us now? Is this an exotic that can still perform, or is it more or less a relic of a sandbox long since past? We'll try to answer that question in this review, and if at any point you find this video useful, helpful, or enjoyable, liking and or subscribing are always greatly appreciated. But feel free to wait till the video's wrapped up to see if you think this content is worth supporting. And with that, let's get into the review and take a look at Wavesplitter's stats and perks. Wavesplitter is an exotic void trace rifle firing at 1,000 rounds per minute with 100 rounds in the magazine. Keep in mind that all trace rifles do run on special ammo. And just something to take note of, the rounds per minute is listed at 1,000, but it's actually a lot closer to 900. Taking a look at the stats and pulling in some solid numbers from Destiny Tracker, we see maxed out marks in aim assist and recoil direction, which is kinda standard for trace rifles. The stability sitting at 96 is very good for the archetype though, while the range, the reload, and the handling all fall pretty well in line with our other trace rifles. The intrinsic trait on Wavesplitter is Harmonic Laser. Laser damage has 3 power levels that oscillate while the trigger is held down. The exotic perk is Supercharged Battery. Collecting an orb of power grants a short period of maximum power that starts with an automatic reload. We'll be taking a pretty in-depth look at both of these facets in the next section. Also, there's no exotic catalyst available for this weapon at the time of recording this video. And if you don't have Wavesplitter yet, this is simply a random world drop. But that's going to wrap us up here, so let's move into the PvE section to check in on our damage, functionality, and performance. Alright, as always, starting things out with our functionality aspects. Trace rifles are basically laser guns. You pull the trigger, they shoot a laser beam. With Wavesplitter, when running over an orb of power, you'll see the Supercharged Battery buff activate. This is going to allow Wavesplitter to fire at its max damage output for 6 seconds. And this also will fully reload your magazine from reserves. While the buff is active if you run over a second orb of power, this will add 5 seconds to the buff duration, but it cannot exceed 10 seconds, and this does not auto-reload your weapon. As stated in the intrinsic trait, this weapon does have 3 damage tiers, and you can tell which tier the weapon is firing at by the screen on the back of the gun. 1 line is going to be low tier damage, 2 lines will be mid tier damage, and when you have 3 lines bouncing up and down on the screen, that's going to be your max damage output. And we're going to be checking in on these damage numbers in just a moment. For Wavesplitter's reload speed, at base, we're coming in at 2 seconds, which is relatively quick. We can improve this reload speed by equipping an auto rifle loader mod, bringing it down to 1.63 seconds. But not all of our auto rifle mods are going to work with trace rifles. I found when previously testing Cold Heart that a dexterity mod will improve the handling, but an auto rifle reserves mod will not allow us to hold any more ammo. 475 rounds is what we get with Wavesplitter, and that's all we're gonna see. Also, for future reference, if auto rifle mods resurface in the seasonal artifact, these are not going to work with trace rifles. But on to the damage numbers, and keep in mind that PvE damage numbers are variable and will change depending on content scaling or enemy tier. I test in the Conflux Lost sector on Nessus, so if you'd like to run any numbers against mine, this is where I'm at. And I gotta say, Wavesplitter was a nightmare to test. There's lots of damage numbers flying off of Carl very rapidly, and I needed to pick out when each of these oscillating damage tiers started and stopped. But hey, that's a me problem, and I think I got everything ironed out for you. For the damage output, at low power, we're looking at 806 to the body and 1,129 on a crit versus Carl. At our mid damage tier, 1,065 to the body, 1,493 on a crit. At our max damage tier, 1,359 to the body, 1,905 on a crit. And as far as the power variation for a full 100 round magazine, I ran these numbers 10 separate times, and the results were dead on consistent. I had always thought that the starting damage when you pull the trigger was random, but from what I'm seeing here, that's not the case. And give me a shot or two of leeway one way or the other here, because like I said, there's a lot of numbers flying. But here's what I got for you. The first 10 rounds are coming out at the mid damage tier. The next 13 are going to be at low damage. Then we shoot straight up to high power for the next 17 rounds, which is not how oscillation works, but whatever. Then 20 at mid tier again, 25 at low tier, 13 at mid, and the last 2 come out at low. That's 40 fired at the low end, 43 fired at mid, and 17 are fired at high power. If we translate these numbers to crit damage and total them all up, that's 141,744 points of damage. The full 100 round magazine will be expended in 6.56 seconds. So our base damage per second through one magazine is 21,607. When looking at the effect of supercharged battery though, if you perfectly time an orb pickup, I'm figuring you have 91 shots at max power, because the buff timer will run out before the magazine empties. The remaining 9 rounds are going to touch off at mid-tier damage. So our maximum potential damage in one magazine, when buffed, comes in at 186,792, bringing our single mag DPS up to 28,474. For comparison's sake though, we're going to take a look at Cold Heart, and I did a lot of the legwork for this weapon back when I reviewed it during Beyond Light. Problem is the damage scaling changed between the 2 seasons, but I can just plug in the updated damage values. With the first 41 shots from Cold Heart, the damage is constantly ramping up. These shots are averaging out to approximately 1,577 points of damage apiece. The final 60 rounds are firing at its max power, which is 2,032 points of damage apiece for a crit. Grand total here comes in at 186,618. Damage is delivered in the same 6.56 seconds. So, single mag DPS comes in at 28,448, which is ever so slightly less than Wavesplitter with supercharged battery active. But you do need to consider that this damage can be achieved without needing to pick up a damage buff. But running Wavesplitter in PvE certainly can have its advantages. While trace rifles as a whole don't have massive single target damage output, they do pack enough punch to quickly dispose of trash ads and melt down major tier targets. And they're relatively easy to use, performing very similar to an auto rifle. And we're only looking at a 1.4 times crit multiplier, so missing out on some crits is not nearly as punishing as it is with a precision based weapon. And plus, these weapons are usable from at least mid-range, and we're going to measure this out in the PvP section, but they do provide reliable damage from a safe distance. Then the supercharged battery with Wavesplitter. Whether you have the gun in hand or not, running over an orb of power is both going to reload the gun and give you that damage buff. And since orbs of power are generally readily available in PvE content, this perk will be proccing quite often. Also, Wavesplitter works great with taking charge and high energy fire. Since an orb pickup fuels the perk, why not take an additional 20% damage on the same function? If you're lucky enough to be running a Warlock, this is a fantastic pairing for Nezarec Sin. And also has the potential to work very well in the Gambit boss phase for dealing with the void shielded primeval envoys. And if you want to try to run double special weapons for an activity pairing Wavesplitter with a kinetic sniper or shotgun, the 475 rounds in reserves can make this a possibility if you want to try it out. We do have some issues though. It's a special weapon that seems to lend itself best for clearing ads and major targets. In most of the content in the game, a primary weapon does this job just fine. Also, no catalyst, so no orb generation. This means if you're running through a piece of content solo, you're going to have to lean on your heavy or your primary weapon, put orbs on the field to fuel Wavesplitter. And while the damage output is good when the buff is active, that 6-second window is a pretty short duration. And without the buff active, the damage feels pretty mediocre for a special weapon. Lastly, trace rifles are always going to burn your exotic slot. Given the rocket launcher buff that we saw this season and the linear fusion rifle buff slated for next season, maybe Wavesplitter could fit a little better into your loadout. But if there's an exotic weapon, kinetic or heavy, that you prefer using, you gotta put it away to run Wavesplitter. And I think we covered PvE pretty thoroughly here. So let's move into the PvP section and talk about what Wavesplitter can do for us in there. Alright, dipping into PvP and starting out with our damage numbers. On a crit, Wavesplitter will connect for 17, 18, or 19 points of damage, depending on where the gun is at in its power level oscillation. Body shots are registering for either 13 or 14 points of damage. And since, as we saw in the PvE section, this weapon's true fire rate is closer to 900 rounds per minute, our optimal time to kill could be as quick as 0.67 seconds with 10 crits and 1 body shot, or 0.73 seconds with 1 additional crit needed. For the body shot time to kill, again depending on the power level of the weapon, we could see 0.93 seconds or 0.87 seconds with 14 or 15 shots landed. And this is going to give us a chance when fighting against roaming supers. If you can keep on target and even land all body shots, you can down one in right around 2 seconds. Now if you're using Charge with Light and High Energy Fire, running over an orb is going to give Wavesplitter its max damage output, plus an additional 20% damage increase. Now our crits are registering for 23 points of damage. This will give you the ability to down an enemy guardian in 0.53 seconds with 9 crits. For the optimal range, we will hit for full damage from 35 meters in. Stepping back to 36 meters, we see damage fall off begin to occur. Alright, for the performance, and my general feelings about Wavesplitter and PvP, it's good, but I just can't help but feel disadvantaged when using it. The optimal time to kills coming in at 0.67 or 0.73 are competitive, and that body shot time to kill of 0.93 seconds is very good, especially given the range it performs at. Then with supercharged battery and a damage buff active, it's almost jarring how quickly you can melt down an enemy player. Plus, the weapon is extremely stable, it has a perfect recoil direction, and has respectable handling and reload speeds. And even though I habitually aim down sights, the hipfire accuracy on trace rifles is very good. Some issues though. First and foremost, it's a special weapon that does have a time to kill. Snipers, shotguns, fusion rifles, and grenade launchers all have one-hit kill potential, and that's typically what I'm looking for when equipping a special weapon. Now you could try running double specials in PvP, but it's not something I'm comfortable doing. The ammo economy worries me a bit. And even though the time to kills on Wavesplitter are very good, it can get outgunned by primary weapons. A lot of our sidearm archetypes and lightweight SMGs can best those time to kills at close range. When looking at longer range engagements, high impact pulse rifles are going to match the time to kill. And you also do have Dead Man's Tale or 120 RPM hand cannons that can 2-tap in 0.5 seconds with a damage buff. And with Wavesplitter performing most like an auto rifle, it doesn't duel very well. You need to break cover, commit to your fight, and hope that you land your shots to put your opponent down first. Lastly, and this may just be a personal issue, but I found trace rifles to be more difficult to use when moving to PC. We do have maxed out aim assist, and essentially this enlarges the target's hitbox by adding bullet magnetism. But if you're playing with a controller, you're also getting the added benefit of reticle stickiness, which I think does trace rifles a world of good. Your physical tracking doesn't need to be as precise. The gun is actively working to help keep you on target. And like I said, this may just be a personal issue relating back to my skill level, but I think there is a noticeable difference, and it's something that I do struggle with. For the verdict, Wavesplitter is a good gun, but in most cases I just don't think it's good enough. I mean, it's plenty serviceable and it can get the job done if you ask it to, but I really have a hard time wanting to run this weapon in PvE, knowing that it's going to take my exotic slot and it can't generate orbs of power. And then in PvP, just flat out, if I'm equipping a special weapon, I want it to have one-hit kill potential. And that's not to say that this gun in the right player's hands isn't a strong weapon, because it certainly could be. But when I look at all of the other options at my disposal, this is not a weapon that's going to be at the top of my list. But one minor adjustment could change my mind. Give this weapon a catalyst, let it create its own orbs of power. Just that change alone would definitely pique my interest. But if you did end up enjoying this video, please remember to leave it a like and consider subscribing to the Ironworker Gaming channel to see more Destiny 2 content in the very near future. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can look for Ironworker814 on Twitter, join our community Discord, link will be in the description, or comment down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to check out this weapon review. You guys are awesome, and I'll catch you on the next one.